And let me just double check here. Okay, we're still having some people come in. So again, we are so glad that you've joined us tonight. This is Scattered Leaves, the African American Families of the Rock Hill Community in Panola County, Mississippi. My name is Robin, and I am a staff member in the History and Genealogy Department at the St. Louis County Library. A few housekeeping items before we begin. This presentation will be recorded and available for later viewing on the library's YouTube channel. This format will be a Zoom webinar. We will be not using the chat. We will not be using the hand raise feature, but we will be using the Q&A. So if you have any questions or comments, please put those in the Q&A. And as far as questions, we will be answering those at the end of the presentation. Also, if you are here tonight as part of our Genealogy University program, go ahead and put your name in the Q&A. And if you're not familiar with that program, it's a new program funded with a grant from our wonderful Library Foundation, where participants take any four of our history and genealogy classes or programs, and they can earn a free MyHeritage DNA kit. This round or this semester is closed, but we will be offering that program again in the future. So be looking out for that. So our case study tonight is the family of our special guest speaker, Len Campbell. Len grew up in Sumner, Mississippi. He has been doing family research since 1998. He is involved with the St. Louis African American History and Genealogy Society, and he is now an author with the publication of his first book, Scattered Leaves. So he is going to talk with us tonight a little bit about what prompted him to write the book, some of the research and the records that he used to put it together, and a bit about publishing a family history book yourself, in case any of you are, interested in your research culminating in a book like that. So again, he will be answering questions at the end, so please put those into the Q&A. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Len Campbell.
All right, thanks, Robin. Good evening, everyone. As Robin has stated before, I'm going to do the introduction to tell you a little bit about the concept of my book, the records that I use for the book, and the meaning of the book, as well as the printing process. Just to give you some background information, Scattered Leaves is focusing on a little town in Mississippi called Sardis, Mississippi. It's about 40 miles south of Memphis, Tennessee. It took me approximately about 7 months to write the book. I started in January of 2022, and I was finished around August of 2022. And played around and got it finally published in November 2022. The way that I initially got started with the book is I wanted to create a cemetery listing. There was currently not a cemetery listing of my ancestors that were buried in the cemetery. So I started on a quest to create that. So once I got the cemetery listing completed, my next quest was to find out as much information as I could of some of the people that were buried there. One of the things that initially fascinated me was some of the names that were being passed down in the different family groups, as well as within the family. And so I wanted to show people that, in this case, my great grandfather was named Herbert Campbell, but we always pronounce his name as Hubbard. But I also discovered that there was another Herbert Campbell, who one was his father and one was his uncle. So it was different little tidbits like that along the way that made this a fascinating journey. The things that I'm going to talk about are probably not new to you, but I'm just going to show you a different way of looking at things. So I started with the cemetery. Again, in the cemetery, there are tombstones. Tombstones can give you all type of information about your family. So I'm going to go through a couple of tombstones and show you how to look at them differently. One thing about the South is the cemeteries there, they have what's called a family plot. So the old cemeteries, generally the people that were buried near each other, there was some type of relationship with each other. In this particular tombstone, it's Lillian Webb Matlock. What you can find from this tombstone is Webb is actually the lady's maiden name. So if you're looking at tombstones, a lot of times women also listed their maiden names. This was a joint tombstone of a husband and wife. This was Armstead and Willie McKinney. So they had a joint headstone together. Sometimes at the bottom of the headstones, it'll say husband and wife. This one was pretty old. So some of it is a little hard to read, but I took some water and a brush and cleaned them off really good. This one is an example of a person that was in the military. It also states that he served in World War II. Now, what's unique about this tombstone here is at the bottom, it says, "This is from your children." So if you ever wondered sometimes if the ancestor had any children, this one here states, if you were doing any research on her, that at the time that she passed away, that she did have children, and they were the ones that purchased this tombstone. Another unique about tombstones in this particular case, this says loved by wife and kids. So this gives you an indication that Victor was married and he outlived his wife outlived him because the tombstone actually says loved by wife and kids. So you know that she was still living at the time that he passed away in 1978. This tombstone here indicates that Anthony Webb was a father, a grandfather, and a great grandfather. So again, if you're doing research, it tells you um, that he was married, he had kids, grandfather, great grandfather. So there are other descendants that are out there. This tombstone here on the back of it, it indicates who her parents were, and it also listed the names of her brothers and sisters. This happens to be my aunt. This tombstone, this was actually a preacher at the church Rock Hill, but it also has in the middle top of the tombstone the symbol for a Mason. So you know that he was part of the Mason Society. And this tombstone here, it indicates that she was a member of the Eastern Star. So the Eastern Star is a society in which women were often members of. And all of these are giving you other avenues of other records of things that you can do to research. It all just depends on what you're looking for in your research and how in depth you would like to go. Sometimes people didn't have tombstones. Sometimes they had a marker or a funeral marker. And this example, this is a funeral marker. Well, the funeral marker, it tells you the name of the funeral home that they use to bury your loved one. When you go to the funeral home, there are records that they have in which you can find out who paid for the funeral, the last address of the person that paid for the funeral, and sometimes they may have a copy of the obituary or death certificate that they may share with you. Other sources to check for cemetery listings, I would suggest to check your state and county libraries of the place of interest to see if a cemetery book exists. I did check for Panola County. The earlier cemetery books, some of them had the Rock Hill Church listed, but they did not have any names of any people that were buried in that cemetery. I was told that they did used to send out correspondence to the various churches. Some responded and some didn't. One thing that I forgot to mention, Rock Hill did have a cemetery book back in the day, but it was common, at least with some of my ancestors back then, that they had a lot of house fires. And the person who was responsible for keeping the cemetery book, house burned down, and the book was burned up in the house fire. And also, you can check the local genealogy societies where your ancestors lived, and sometimes the church itself may have records. Another record I used was a marriage record, and you're familiar with a marriage record. It gives you the bride and groom's name, the date and location of the marriage, ages, sometimes the occupations, and parents' names. This particular example is a marriage bond. Um, in Mississippi, the earlier marriage, uh, they were called marriage bonds because they had to indicate that they were of legal age to get married. And the names at the top were related to the bride and the groom. So sometimes, if you're trying to go further back, the names at the top, in this case, it was Anderson Campbell and Ben Ellis. Um, Anderson Campbell was actually the groom, and Ben Ellis was related to the bride, Lizzie Farley. So this was just a document to state that they were of legal age to get married. This is an example of a marriage certificate. This is probably the most common record that you see when you're looking online. Again, this was Anderson Campbell and Lizzie Farley. Gives the date of the marriage, the county where it took place, and the person that the minister's name that actually performed the marriage. Now, also, what I discovered is sometimes there's a marriage application that went along with the marriage certificate. Um, the marriage application, in this example, it gave the age of the bride and the groom. It told who was the next of kin, and it also asked them what were their occupations. So sometimes I would recommend actually going to the courthouse to see if a application actually exists. Most of the time when you see postings, it's just postings of the actual marriage certificate. Again, this is just giving you where you can find these records. The county courthouse where your ancestors live, local libraries. You can check the Freeman marriage records. I did find a lot of marriages on Family Search. The Mormons, I'm not sure how often they go down, but they went down and they copied a lot of the earlier marriage records and have them online. And there's also some marriage records I found also on Ancestry.com. Okay, military records is another source of information. It can also include birth and death dates and give you names and addresses of family members and their military ranks as well. Again, this here is my great-grandfather, Hubbard Campbell, and they spelled it this time the way that we pronounce it, Hubbard. It gives his age, but also some unique things on here is it tells who he was employed by. It also states that he was married and he had 3 children. One thing about the World War One draft cards, if you look at the corner here is torn. This was the way that they identified if you were Black. So if you look at one of the World War Ones and you're wondering what the race is, if it's not indicated up here, if the corner is torn, that indicates that they were Black. On the World War II draft registration cards, they ask the question, name and address of a person who will always know your address. And he listed Etta Robertson, and Etta Robertson was his stepmother. And one thing with Sardis, I stated that it was 40 miles south of Memphis. So a lot of times when they went to the hospitals and things by Memphis was the big city that they went to. So sometimes you have to look at neighboring states if they're close by, or larger city that's near your ancestors. And military records, you can find them on fold3.com as well as Ancestry. And there are also, you know, that the military records are stored at the National Archives, which is located here in St. Louis. I don't know if the National Archives, since COVID, if they are letting people come there to do research, but I know before COVID, you have to set up an appointment to go there, but I'm not sure if they have started back yet. Death certificates. Death certificates are like a genealogy gold mine. You can find the names of the parents, the cause of the death, the informant. There's just a lot of information that you can find, hopefully, if it's filled out on a death certificate. In this death certificate here, this is a stillborn. One of the things about stillborn's death certificate, this is probably the only time that you will actually see the mother and father's name listed with both parents possibly being still alive. Normally, when death certificates are filled out, is one of your ancestors has passed, and sometimes the informant may or may not know the information that's given the information. But in this particular case, for stillborns, they generally have the mother's maiden name that is often missing from off of uh, even a regular death certificate. Sometimes people don't know the mother's maiden name, but they know the married name. So this is another avenue if you're looking for maiden names to check stillborns to see if that name is listed there. This one, if you see, also it was the state of Tennessee. A lot of my ancestors died over in Tennessee, um, and Memphis as well as Tennessee. They do have their death certificates online for free. Mississippi does not have any death certificates online. They have the index online, and you have to go to the archives to see the death certificates if they died between 1912 to 1943. After that, you would have to go to Mississippi Vital Records. This is a example of a death certificate of my great great uncle. One thing that fascinated me was it showed that his cause of death was a gunshot wound. And here it says he was shot by the sheriff. Death certificates, you can find them at vital records of the state that your ancestors lived. You can try the state archives. Um, a lot of my family, they migrated up north to Chicago and Gary, Indiana, because Gary, Indiana had the steel mill, and so on Ancestry, the Indiana death certificates are online, so you can see the actual death certificate. In Illinois, they are on Family Search, but they don't have the actual death certificate, but they transcribe the information from the death certificate and then it's on Family Search. But some of them is by, different years, but you can look online, especially if your family did migration like most families did from the South. Newspapers, sometimes your ancestors, depending on what their profession was, sometimes they made the newspaper, so that's another source of information. This is what we are used to. This is an obituary that was put in the newspaper. Again, that tells where he was born, his parents, um, who he was leaving behind. This was a cousin of mine who was out of town, who was killed in a car accident, and the car accident made the newspaper. This here was the actual article from my great great uncle that once I saw his death certificate that said that he was killed by the sheriff, I was able to actually find the actual article to read about what happened with his death. Sources for newspapers, you can check genealogybank.com, newspapers.com. You can check the courthouses. Sometimes they have the newspapers there. If the newspaper itself is still not in business, sometimes they're stored at courthouses. You can check the state archives. Sometimes they digitize some of the newspapers, so they may have digitized all of the newspapers. So those are other sources to check. And this is an obituary. I'm going to show you some things on an obituary that you probably looked at before, but I'm going to have you to look at it in a different way. So normally when we look at an obituary, the front, we see the name, Molly Campbell. We see the year of birth and the year of death, 1892, 1973. A lot of times we get fixated on that. But when you actually look inside the obituary and you start reading, it states she was born in Sardis, Mississippi. Okay, that's great. She was the fifth child of 11. But one thing on here, it stated after a long illness, she departed this life October 12th, 1973, in the American Hospital in Chicago, Illinois. So earlier I stated how my family migrated up north, Chicago and Gary, Indiana. So at the time of her death, she was in Chicago. She ended up living with one of her daughters, and she got sick and went into the hospital there, and she ended up dying in Chicago. So sometimes when you're looking for death certificates, I couldn't find it in Mississippi because she died in Chicago. And then the other thing is when it lists the people who were living, it also lists where they were living at the time that she died. So she had quite a few daughters who were living in Chicago, as well as some of her sons. And then there were still some that were still back in Sardis, Mississippi. On the older obituaries, when you look at the back, they had names of pallbearers, and they also sometimes had names of flower girls. Generally, the names of the pallbearers were members who were related to the family, or they were really close to the family. So if you're building your tree, also look at the back, look at those names because they can also give you clues to your ancestors. And again, on the back, it still has the funeral home, the address of that particular funeral home, and this here was a phone number. So this was an old one back in 1980. I'm sorry, 1991. And the sources for obituaries, you can check the church, Genealogy Society. You can go by the different funeral homes, genealogybanknewspapers.com. And also you can just ask some of your older relatives or older people in the town. There was a lady, she wasn't related to me, but she was a member of the Rock Hill Church. Um, Obituaries was things that sometimes people who couldn't make it to the funeral, they used to always say, make sure you get me an obituary. And she had a suitcase just full of obituaries that she had collected. She lived there all of her life, and she just kept them in a suitcase. So sometimes, just talking to older people, they may have obituaries and things stored somewhere. And so you never know what you may find and who you may find it from. In Mississippi, one of the unique records that they have is called the Mississippi Enumeration of Educatable Children. This was similar to like the census records. It was done anywhere from every 2 to 4 years, and it listed only the kids who were between the ages of 5 and 20. And it would list them along with either their parent or guardian. Um, One good thing about these records is I was able to fill in the gap from the 1890 census being burned. So between 1880 and 1900, there were some school records that I was able to use that I could fill in the gap. In this example, John Butler was the guardian, and these were the kids of his: Geraldine, Letha Pearl, Inez, Robert, Esther. And over here, he put their age and the month that they were born. And again, they were in the Rock Hill School District. Land records are another great gold mine of finding out how families connect. And I'm going to show you an example. In this particular example, I'm not sure how well you can see some of it, but he's saying, unto my son, John Matlock Jr., he was giving him a portion of his land. And the witness was his wife, Mary Matlock. And it states here the date that they signed and the witness of the signature. And in the verbiage that I'm not sure if you can see, but it also is stating who the people are. And then other sources of information is just oral history, city directories, social security applications, wills, photographs. Um, a lot of times, if you find um, an old picture album and you sit with an older relative, they can just start talking, giving you information about the people. Sometimes people passed away a long time ago and people kind of forgot, but then when they see that picture it juggles their memory. Same thing with nicknames. um, when you're talking, sometimes people are known by their nickname more so their government name. One thing that I forgot to put on here was family Bibles. um, so sometimes you can find a Bible that has a lot of information in it as well. So after I started compiling all of the information, is when the concept of um, the book was coming along. So I picked the name and all of that at the end. So again, like as I stated, when I went in, I didn't know that I was going to end up doing a book like I did. I thought it was going to be something simple, just with a cemetery listing. But the meaning of scattered leaves, those that of you that do family research, we're always are searching for our family tree. And we belong to many trees. And it's the common trunk and root of that system of that tree that we are looking to solve. And so I said we're like scattered leaves. We're searching for the trees that gave us life. And then next was finding how I wanted to publish the book. So I found this company, KDP. They are an umbrella under Amazon. One thing that I liked about them is you basically tell them exactly how you want. They give you a template. You put everything in the template, and there's no cost or money that comes out of your pocket up front. So what they do is they take a certain percentage from the book sales. So it's um, I call it, it was very low maintenance of anything that I had to be responsible for. So I was just able to put it in the template. They do a review to make sure that different things aren't getting cut off. And I formatted everything myself and they do the printing. So it was a very easy process for me. And next is the questions.
Yes. Hello. I am coming back on, and we do have a couple of questions. I'm going to ask you one really quickly, though, that I was writing down as you were talking. Thank you, by the way. That was such a wonderful overview of all the different types of records, and specifically some that are great for Mississippi, which we do have a lot of patrons come into the library and they are doing research in Mississippi. The census substitute that you used, which was the children in school of school
Yes.
age. Where do you find those? What platform are those on?
Good question. Here's what has happened. In in the state of Mississippi, um, each county is slightly different.
Mhm.
So in Panola County, the records are kept in the courthouse. In Yalobusha County, the records are kept at the superintendent's office. So I would say they were anywhere between the superintendent's office or the courthouse. And in the courthouse, they were in the chancery clerk's office. One thing about those records, and you're juggling my memory, is a lot of my grandfather was born in 1915. He did not have a birth certificate. So when it was time for him to retire and he had to prove his age, they used the school records to prove that he was of age. And so most of the people, that's what they are using those records for people who didn't have birth certificates to prove that they were of age to legally draw Social Security.
Okay, so probably going straight to those counties. You're not aware of any of those on like Family Search or
Oh,
Ancestry,
yes,
or
yes.
are they? Oh,
Family Search has published some of them. They
mhm,
don't have all of them on there, but they do
mhm.
have a great deal. If you
Nice.
go on Family Search, what I would recommend, you type in Mississippi for the records, and it's going to be part of the listing. And they have them broken down by county.
Perfect. Okay. I am going to go ahead and we can kind of tag team this one. And then I've got several that are just for you, but, uh, one of our attendees said, do you have to pay for newspapers? Ancestry.com. When I went to click on the newspaper, it wanted me to purchase a subscription. So yes, newspapers.com is a subscription based service, but you can access a lot of those newspapers through the library. We have a newspapers.com account. If you have a St. Louis County library card, St. Louis City has it, St. Charles County has it. Any of those libraries, if you have a library card or a reciprocal card, you should be able to access the library's version of newspapers.com for free, and you can use it at home if you know your library card and your PIN. I will say, though, that the library's newspapers.com account is not the full account. There are some papers, I'll use the Post-Dispatch as an example, that don't go up very high for like copyright reasons. So the Post only goes up to 1922. The Globe actually goes up to 1963. So it just kind of depends on what they were able to work out with the paper for what subscription level. But yes, newspapers.com is a subscription. If you're using Ancestry and it gives you a link and you don't have a newspapers.com account, you won't be taken to it, but you can make a note of it and then, maybe use the library's version. Do you have any other thoughts on newspapers, Len,
No,
related to that?
you hit everything.
Okay.
Um, the only thing, Genealogy Bank also has
Oh,
newspapers, and sometimes one has newspapers that the other one doesn't have.
mhm.
Another newspaper was the Chicago Defender. Um, it was, I'm trying to think of a correct way to say it. It collected news from all over the United States. So sometimes you may find some unique things that were in the Chicago Defender, even though your relatives may not have actually lived in Chicago, but sometimes there were things that made that newspaper there.
Okay, so now we've got some multiple, several part question here. So, first one has to do with photos. So, you talked a little bit about photos, but the attendee says, how do I get photos of my great grandmother and great grandfather? Maybe.
Okay. Um, I would start asking questions to your oldest living relative, and see what information they have. Um, in my family, and it probably happens a lot, when a person dies, we take their stuff, and sometimes it's packed up in a box. and sometimes we know it's there in the box, but we don't actually look to see what's in that box. But I would start with the oldest family member, ask them about photos. Generally, if they don't know, they would know somebody in the family that may have some. Um, Friends of the family, sometimes they have photos. Um, One gold mine, as I call it, that I found, the people who lived out of state had a lot of more stuff than the people who did in state. And that was solely because you have to think back during that time, it was more economical that when they came to visit, that one family member would come down and they would take photos back to where they lived. So some of the people out of state had the old photographs because they took them back to them so that they can show their kids, husbands, grandkids, and things, pictures of their ancestors.
That's a great point. She did add that all of her parents, uncles, etc., are deceased, but I do want to mention, just kind of along these lines, that what I find too is, even if the older generation is gone, sometimes speaking to your relatives who are in your same generation, so siblings and cousins, sometimes they know things that, maybe other people don't know. People remember different things. Maybe they were told different stories. So that could have possibly happened with pictures as well. There may be someone in your same generation that has some of those pictures that were passed down. Another question in this same grouping was, how would I get a DNA sample? So you didn't talk too much about DNA, Len, and I'm not sure if that was a part of this at all, but or if yours was mostly based on the records. But we get a lot of questions at the library about DNA. If you're interested in doing, adding DNA to your genealogy research, I would start with yourself, go ahead and do a DNA test. But as far as getting DNA samples, um, from family members, I have actually bought them as gifts before, bought DNA kits for family members that I know wanted to do it and given it to them as a gift. So that may be a way to, maybe get other people to test. And then she also said, and I don't know if you have done many of these, Len, but she said, I'm having a family reunion and I want to educate my family on our family tree. And she is from Mississippi. So I don't know if you have any advice for her on that.
Okay. Okay. So I'll start with the DNA first.
Okay.
I have taken the DNA test. I didn't use the DNA for the book only because the book was only focusing on the people that were buried in that cemetery. I didn't focus much on the relationships of the families other than listing who their parents were. But family reunions, oh gosh. Um, every year um, on my father's side of the family, we get together for Thanksgiving. And I'm responsible for the theme and putting something together. Um, for me, um, because I just love family research, um, people seem to be fascinated by any little thing that I show them. So whether it's a census record, agricultural census, um, military, it's so many different avenues of how you can take things and how deep you can go into it. Like I said, even the marriage records, land records, just a plot of a map that show where they lived, how things have changed from the 1900s to now. It's just a lot of different avenues you can take it.
I totally agree with what you said, though, about just even showing off the records, because we're used to seeing these things all of the time. Those of us who do this for a living and have done it for many years. But family members who don't do this all the time, they are delighted when I show them something new. So even bringing some of those things. Okay, so we have another question, Len. She says, great talk. And then she said, do you have any suggestions of where to go for cemetery records when the funeral home changed hands? And I think the older records, which I need, were lost in the shuffle.
Okay. I've ran into that same issue. Um, what I would recommend to check, find out the owners of the funeral home, see if you can find any of their descendants, because they may have kept some of the records when it changed hand. If not, um, you can look at so one of the things that I ended up doing that I didn't state, I talked about the records, but when I went to the archives, I asked specifically for Panola County, and I just flipped through each death certificate until I saw that they were buried in the Rock Hill Cemetery. So it's time consuming, but you can piece puzzles together that way, as well as the newspaper. Um, and I'm thinking about a lot of things that I could have focused more on. Even with the newspaper, um, they had a section that was called the colored section. And the colored section was very interesting because it would tell sometimes that so and so came from Waterloo, Iowa to this person's funeral, or they were there visiting because somebody was in the hospital. Um, when you're doing research, there are so many different gold mines that you may be able to find that another person isn't. Um, so I would see sometimes if there was a descendant of the funeral home, if they kept any any records, or if not, you would just have to go through looking at death certificates or newspapers to see if you can fill in some of the blanks.
And how long did you say, somebody asked, how long did you say it took you to put the book together? Did you say 7 months? Is that what you said?
Yeah, but I have been doing research,
For much
uh,
longer.
right, for much longer, because one of the things that I struggle with is what is going to be exciting to the reader. For me, everything is exciting. But when you're asking the question, what people would like to see, that's a different question. One of the things also that as I was writing the book, I found myself also falling back doing research because I was finding out things on some of my ancestors that I didn't know, and I was picking up on another loose end. So finally, I had to say, okay, you got to stop and focus on completing this.
Okay. Someone asked, how can you find out if death certificates are online or somewhere else? And you kind of spoke to this, but I think basically to start it off, it really depends on the state.
Yeah.
But you can take it from there.
Yes. If you actually Google the state, um, things that come up to let you know what one of the things that's going to come up is vital records. Vital records is always going to come up, but there are other sites, if they are free, is going to indicate from there. um, if you go to Ancestry or even Family Search, you can filter the search by death, and you can look to see if they have those records online
And
and what
just,
years.
oh, go ahead.
Oh, and I was saying, and what years
Oh,
that they may have.
right. And just a quick note, there may be some of you who are watching who do have people who came to Missouri, St. Louis area. And I'm sure there are some of you out there. And those are online for free if you haven't used it before on Missouri Digital Heritage. 1910 through 1973 now are all online for free. So it really just depends on the state. Have you done, next question, Len, have you done any research or are familiar at all with Noxubee County in Mississippi?
I've not done any
Okay.
research in Noxubee County, but I know where it's located.
Okay. Someone was just wondering where records were kept there, but I would think probably the best thing for the attendee to do is probably to maybe check the Family Search Wiki. I do that. You can be in Family Search, but sometimes I'll just also Google search the name of the county that I'm maybe unfamiliar with. So I'll put Noxubee County, Mississippi genealogy. And usually the first search result that comes up is the Family Search Wiki page. And it will tell you when the county was formed, if there were any records lost, where the courthouse is. It may even give you links to start doing some research in that county. So that's what I would suggest in trying to answer that question. We also have someone who said that census, the educable census, is on Family Search. So they were reiterating that, Len. And then also, I think I saw somewhere further down that someone said Ancestry as well. So, and then I think you mentioned this before, the death certificates that are at the Mississippi archives. Could you go through again the dates for those? Someone is asking about that.
So the date for Mississippi starts November 1912 and it goes all the way to 1943. So you can look those death certificates up, and I think they only charge 15 cents to print them. You can also send a request and they will uh, print them and mail them to you as well. I think they charge a $30 fee for out of state, and they charge maybe like a 25-cent fee for the copying of the death certificate. There is a lady online, if you're interested, and send Robin your information. I can send you her name and information. She looks up death certificates in Mississippi for there, and she charges $5 a certificate.
Okay. Yeah. So if you want to send that information to me, and then if anybody is interested in that name and contact information, you can send us an email at genealogy@slcl.org, and I can get that information to you. So okay, moving on here. An attendee wants to let us know that for paid subscriptions, you might also join the community on wikitree.com and ask for lookups there. It's my favorite place to collaborate with genealogists around the world. So that's a good tip. Okay, another one is, and this is going back to the DNA, which is of course a hot topic right now. What do you feel is a better DNA test for African Americans, or does it matter?
Ooh, good question.
I do know that there is an African American DNA company that specializes in that. Whether or not the science would be any better, I don't know. We usually recommend at the library, we recommend one of the big, any one of the big companies. It kind of depends on what you want to do with it. Ancestry is usually the best for combining it with research because there are a lot of people on Ancestry. But also MyHeritage is another good one, which are the tests that we're giving away. Some of the tests like 23andMe, they give you more on the health side, but I don't think they're quite as beneficial for the genealogy side because people aren't doing genealogy on that site. But that's just my 2 cents. So Len, I'll let you add.
Okay. I have tested on 23andMe, Ancestry, Family Tree DNA, and MyHeritage. and I have uploaded my DNA results also to GEDmatch. Um, each of the DNA companies give you a little something different than the other. Um, Ancestry.com, here's the pros and the cons. Their people are subject to have a family tree there. The con is sometimes the family tree that they have associated with their DNA may not be their tree. um 23andMe, before they had this data breach, they give you the chromosome that you match a person on, and that's the same thing that MyHeritage gives you now. And that is, in my opinion, what I call the true gold mine of relationships is looking at the chromosome. Ancestry tells you who you have common ancestors with, but it doesn't tell you how or which side that you may be related to that person. But when you have three or more people who overlap on the same chromosome, they call that triangulation. That's how you know that there is a true connection in which branch that person falls on.
Okay, I think we're going to have you back, Len, to talk about DNA.
Okay.
Would you come
I
back
can,
to talk about DNA?
yeah, I can talk about, because I've had lots of experience, trial and error.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, we have one more question, and I will go ahead and take this one. Is Ancestry.com free? No, Ancestry.com is a subscription service, but you can use Ancestry Library Edition at any St. Louis County Library branch for free. Also, any St. Louis City Library branch or St. Charles County Library branch. If you are watching this and you are out of town, you're not in the St. Louis metro area, you may check with your local library because they may have a subscription there as well. And I think, oh, and then we have, thank you so much for this information, Len. We had an attendee wanted to let you know that. So I think that's all of the questions. This was so fantastic. Thank you so much. I do have the slides. So if anybody, I did not go ahead and send those out ahead of time, but Len did say that I could send those out. So if anybody's interested in those, you can also send us an email at genealogy@slcl.org, and we can get those out to you if you want to kind of remember, the things that he talked about. And did you have anything else, Len?
Oh, yeah, I didn't state which DNA company that I felt the more African Americans are on.
Oh, yeah.
I would say Ancestry.com.
Okay.
And it's because they were cheaper than the others, and they have a lot of different sales around different holidays.
Mm-hmm.
So they're probably more on Ancestry.com than any of the other ones.
Yes, that is excellent information. So like I said, we're going to have you back to talk about DNA. But as far as tonight, thank you so much. We ended right on time. Everyone had wonderful questions, and I hope that this, gave you some inspiration, gave you some ideas for where to go for your own ancestors. And maybe thinking about, putting them into something more permanent like a book. And if you end up doing that, if you end up writing a family history, definitely let us know at the library, because we will catalog it and we will put it into our collection. And then there will be, one that's saved in a library forever. So, and you know what? I had one more come in. So if you don't mind, Len, I'm going to grab this one real quick.
Okay.
And this will be the last one. Somebody also said thank you. And then this is another one. She is saying that she talked to a genealogist who advised to avoid AfricanAncestry.com. And like you said, start with Ancestry. There was a particular genealogist, professional genealogist who told her this. That was the one that I was thinking of that is specializes in African, but I don't know if you would have any thoughts on that, avoiding that and just going to Ancestry, like you said.
I have heard the same thing that
Mhm.
that one may not give you true results.
Okay, good. Very good. So we're all in agreement. All right. Well, thank you again so much, Len. Thank you all for attending. I hope you have a wonderful evening and hopefully we'll see you back here soon.
Okay, all right. Thank you.